They laughed when I stumbled on the ballroom steps, the microphone squealing as my palm brushed it, a sound so sharp it could slice the night open, and it did right through me. I heard Vanessa's stage whisper, "Sit down, Margaret. You've had enough." And the crowd chuckled like a flock of bright birds pecking at crumbs of me. I wanted to vanish, but the storm clawing at the windows promised there'd be no quiet place to hide, even if I did, and that certainty jammed like a splinter under my skin. Would you have swallowed your words or let them burn your tongue like I did? I had come to the harvest ball with a tin of lemon bars and a heart full of hope that this year, maybe, my son would remember who taught him how to stand tall. The chandeliers blazed, the band slid into a satin version of Blue Moon, and the mayor, cheeks glossy with drink, thanked Andrew for sponsoring the renovation of the Riverside venue. They clapped for my boy the way they used to clap for my pies, and I pressed my old fingers together, steadying the tremor that always starts when I want to say more than the room can hold. Did you ever feel your hands tell on your heart before your mouth could? Vanessa didn't just take the mic, she snatched it the way a cat takes a sparrow. "Let's also thank Andrew's mother for attending," she sang, the smile lacquered so thick it looked like armor. "She's spirited." Another laugh, and then, "We've all noticed how forgetful she's been. If she approaches you asking for donations, just send her back to our table. We don't want any confusion tonight." A dozen faces tilted toward me as if I were a stain to be rubbed out. I tasted metal, like I'd bitten my tongue on purpose to stop a scream clawing its way up. Have you ever seen your name held up like a napkin to the light, checking for holes? The storm leaned against the old windows and bared its teeth. The river, I knew, would be shouldering the bank like a drunk at closing time. I'd walked the dam 2 days ago, walked it with my cane tapping out a code my bones remembered from when Henry was alive, and felt the vibration through the concrete like a great animal pacing. I'd told the councilwoman, Vanessa, with her cinnamon perfume and pearls like a ring of small moons, that the sluice sensors were stuck and the emergency radio by the southwest turret blinked a dead red. "We have people for that," she said, already turning away. "You ever throw your whole self into a warning and watch it sink without a ripple?" My grandson, Josh, tried to shield me from the glare, bless him. "Gran, let's head home," he murmured, but the rain slapped the glass harder, and I couldn't make my feet move. I felt the room tipping, not from whiskey. My glass was club soda with lime, but from the way shame rearranges gravity so that your bones weigh triple and your voice weighs dust. The band stopped. Phones came up. Someone was filming, and the red eye of the camera burned into my cheeks. I steadied myself and saw, past the smirks, the exit sign buzzing like a caged insect. Don't you ever want to punch the eye of the whole watching world closed? The lights flickered, hovered, then went out. Ballroom swallowed whole, until the generator coughed and spat a mangy glow. The DJ made a joke about ambience. We laughed like we weren't standing on a river's throat. In that dimness, I felt the old key in my purse press into my hip, the brass warmed by my body heat like a small sun. Henry had given it to me the year the flood almost took the cannery. "If they forget, Maggie, you remember," he'd said. I put my palm over that key and felt my heart even out. Have you ever touched a memory so hard it turned into a plan? Then the siren cut through the room, not the pretty firehouse wail, but the low groan that says, "Move." The ballroom stilled. People laughed nervously, a sound like ice cracking. Vanessa frowned at the ceiling like she could shush the weather. The mayor conferred with Andrew, who glanced at me as if the siren were my fault. And maybe it was. Maybe I'd conjured this sound with the anger I'd swallowed, and now it was shaking the walls of every shame I'd ever kept tidy. Do you know the exact second when you stop being scared and start being certain? I took a breath, the kind that starts in your heels and climbs like a slow fire, and raised my voice over the mewling generator. "Everyone to the old parking lot behind the cannery," I said. "Leave the riverside exits. Use the high street door. Do not take the river stair." My voice surprised me. It carried like wind moving through a field that knows it's taller than the fence. A few people obeyed the habit of listening to an old woman and started toward the high door. Most looked to Vanessa and the mayor as if their smiles were life jackets. Ever notice how quick people trade wisdom for a wristband? Vanessa waved me off. "Please keep calm. "The venue is safe," she announced. "Andrew invested in the best." Rain shot like needles against the glass, and water pushed under the far door in a slick tongue. My cane tapped once, twice, thrice. I saw Lily, the 16-year-old from down the street, always smelling of library books, slip to my side. "Gran, say the word," she whispered. I looked at the red exit sign and the door beyond it, the corridor that led to the old bridge and the turret stairs I'd climbed more times than I could count. "Can you feel the moment a hallway becomes a spine and you are the skull steering it?" I said the word by moving, and Lily moved with me. Josh followed. The ballroom broke into arguments behind us like a hive kicked awake. We burst into wet darkness. The wind grabbed my hair and flung it in my face. My coat ballooned like a sail. Up ahead, the river writhed white under the bridge and slapped its sides, as if testing the pins holding it to the earth. The dam's spillway roared like a freight train one curve away. I clutched the brass key and felt Henry draw breath in my fingers. Do you trust the voice that lives in your knuckles more than the one that trembles in your throat? We made the turret in a sprint walk that felt like a bargain with my own lungs. The emergency radio blinked dead, just as I'd said. The padlock on the access wheel was new and expensive, Andrew's kind of lock, meant to keep old hands out. My key didn't look fancy. It looked like memory, and in it went, slick with rain, and the lock surrendered with a sigh, metal recognizing a promise it made a lifetime ago. I leaned the full ache of my years against the wheel and began to turn. Have you ever been the hinge the whole night swings on? The sluice groaned open, the river took that invitation like a guest who's been waiting too long, and the pressure shook the stone beneath my shoes. But the water began to fall, inch by stubborn inch. Behind us, sirens multiplied. I thought of the ballroom, of Vanessa's pearls, of Andrew's tuxedo shoulders, of the laughter that had tried to make my bones unloved. I did not bless them. I did not curse them. I just kept turning. Then Lily grabbed my arm. "Gran, look," and pointed. The riverside venue doors had blown wide, and the glow spilling out was not generator light but the kind of light that comes from a dozen phone screens raised high, filming as something black and heavy slid into the ballroom like a dark tongue. Can you picture what it is to watch a room that mocked you become a mouth swallowing its own laughter? I turned the wheel harder, and that's when I saw the shape caught in the rush, a man's tuxedo jacket, a hand clawing the air, a face I knew better than my own. Andrew, eyes wild, mouth forming my name as the current yanked him toward the turbines. And in the same breath, Lily yelled again because someone else, smaller, had climbed the balcony rail inside, slipping, flailing, Vanessa. Pearls flashing like drowning moons as she reached for a metal box tucked under the DJ's table. The charity safe we weren't supposed to know about. And the wind took my next breath and threw it into the roar as the wheel jammed under my palms. Do you want to know which one I went for? People think the night is made in the dark, but the truth is nights like that are braided in daylight with 1,000 ordinary strands you pretend aren't rope until they cinch. The first strand was a Tuesday in April when I found the council notice glued to my mailbox, the paper blistering under dew. Maintenance contract awarded to Willow Creek Events and Infrastructure LLC. Fancy name, same old men behind it, plus Vanessa in a blazer the color of money. I read it twice and heard Henry's voice the way you hear your heartbeat in a stone church. Steady, unimpressed, faithful. Ever read a line so harmless it feels like a splinter you can't see? I took my cane and walked the path to the dam, because paper can lie but concrete tells the truth in a hum. Birds stitched the sky. The river wore its spring dress, loud, green, rising. I pressed my palm to the south buttress. The vibration rode my bones like a secret horse. A hairline crack smiled along the expansion joint, thin as regret. The emergency phone box wore a fresh lock, shiny as a new tooth. That's not city issue, I told the empty air. And the empty air nodded back like it knew the feeling of being replaced. Have you ever caught the world rearranging the furniture of your home without asking? I brought it to the council meeting with my notes neat as quilting squares. Vanessa, chairing, let me speak last. She smiled the way people smile at toddlers holding drawings. Thank you, Margaret, she said. We appreciate your passion. Passion, I learned, is what they call it when you're right and in their way. Andrew avoided my eyes. His pen made tiny circles he never filled in. I pushed the words across the room. Sensors stuck, radio dead, lock wrong, and watched them evaporate against a glass shield labeled not profitable. Ever watch your son sit on the other side of a word and refuse to cross? Back home I bake. Flour forgives what people don't. I rolled lemon bars and blueberry pies and slid trays into heat that never mocks you for needing to be held steady. I fed the neighbor kids. Lily, who loved crossword puzzles and always smelled like clean paper. Marco from the next block, whose laugh bounced like a ball. Tara, thin as a question mark. They called me Gran even though their grandmothers were alive and well and far away. We made a little family out of sugar and listening. Sometimes the world's cruelty is a wide river, but sometimes it is one small spoon pushed into your hand just when you've forgotten you're hungry. Do you know how to keep that kind of kindness warm? Andrew came by on a Sunday with a roast chicken and a new watch that flashed on his wrist like an apology that forgot the words. "Mom," he said, emptying coffee grounds into the sink. I told him 1,000,000 times clogs. You know how it is. Investors. Ticks. The venue needs private management. He ran his hand through his hair the way he did when he was 15 and wanted a later curfew. Vanessa's good at this. She understands people. I wiped the grounds off the drain and wished I could wipe the fear off his mouth. Ever see love turn into a way of not looking? What about understanding a lock that doesn't belong? Yes. He shrugged. The world changes, Mom. He kissed my crown and left the smell of cologne on my gray like a polite ghost. I watched him walk down the path Henry laid with his own hands. Life is cruel in the way a road never begs you to turn around. Have you felt a door close softly enough that you convince yourself it's still open? Kept walking the dam. Kept stirring batter. Ashir called me sweetie. A man in a suit on the sidewalk used his phone like a shield and said, "Watch your step, ma'am," as if the earth were a trap built just for me. I felt the young part of me. The part who danced at 19 in a red dress Henry said made me look like a flame. Stand up inside my bones and smooth her skirt. I whispered, "I'm here," and my ribs answered back. Do you talk to the girl you were until she answers in a voice only you can hear? The week of the ball, Lily brought over a flyer with my face on it. Some charity promo Andrew's team had made without asking me. My smile too wide, my eyes crease-mapped by time. "They're using you to make it look wholesome," she said, practical as scissors. "You going?" I said I hadn't decided, but I'd already baked the lemon bars. Truth is, when someone takes your place at your own table, you show up with napkins and your chin held like it's holding the ceiling. Do you ever choose to stand where you weren't invited just to measure the edge of your uninvitedness? Storm warnings came on the radio. A tropical depression ragged with teeth, shrugged off by the morning show host as a moody sky. I tapped the barometer Henry left on the pantry shelf. It felt like a man who knows no one's going to catch him. Called the city. No one picked up. I called Andrew. Voicemail poured honey in my ear. I called Vanessa. She answered and told me not to worry. The venue's rated for 100-year flood, she said, and I pictured a calculator nodding. Numbers are such gallant liars. Ever hold a fact so polished it doesn't stick to anything true? On the afternoon of the ball, Josh came to walk me down Main. He wore his thrift store suit like a dare and his father's gentleness like a second skin. "Gran," he said, looping my arm through his. "If anyone says a word, I'll throw this punch bowl you made at their heads." I laughed so hard I had to sit on the stoop. Laughter before a storm feels like a dare to the sky. Do you ever insult the weather with joy and hope it forgives you? At the venue, the river sulked heavy and brown. The wind fretted the flag on the city pole until it looked like a frayed confession. Inside, the band tuned their instruments, and the mayor rehearsed his grin. Vanessa shimmered at the door, pearls reflecting the chandelier like she'd trapped tiny moons and taught them to behave. "Margaret," she trilled. "Lovely to see you. Try not to wander." She handed me a name tag that said, "Community Matriarch." Pinned it on. If they insist on labels, I thought, let them stick one to the hardest part of me. Ever wear an insult until it becomes armor? They sat me at table 4, far from the stage. Lemon bars vanished as fast as they were set down, because no matter how modern a town gets, butter and sugar still remind everyone what gratitude tastes like. They thanked Andrew for everything. They thanked Vanessa for the ribbon cutting. Someone thanked the storm for adding drama. I felt my heart pedal faster in my chest. Drama is what you call it before it becomes consequence. Are you good at recognizing the last harmless minute? When Vanessa took the microphone and offered me up to the wolves dressed in laughter, something in me went very still. Shame is a bell jar. Sound is inside it, but the air is thin. I saw through that glass the high door, the hallway, the bridge, the dam. I saw Henry's hands on the wheel. I saw my own hands covering his long after he was gone, circling, turning the night to our side. And then the siren arrived like an old friend who'd been kept waiting. Have you ever felt a future tap you on the shoulder like, "We're up"? The room balloon burst. People grabbed their handbags. The only thing you can count on is the way humans carry their small worlds with them when they run. Understood. Vanessa told me to sit. The mayor asked for calm. Andrew looked like a boy who'd lost his kite and was furious at the wind. Josh reached for my elbow and Lily. Oh, Lily appeared through the crowd as if she'd been born for doorways. We made our choice. We moved. Do you know the way a decision can be a floor appearing under your feet? We pounded across the bridge into a night that had decided not to be polite. The turret door fought us, then forgave us. The lock met my key like old friends who pretend not to know each other in public and then embrace in the alley. The wheel turned. The river answered. And somewhere behind us the ballroom doors blew open, and the phones came up to film their own surprise as the dark tongue of the river licked what they loved like sugar off a plate. Have you tasted vindication and fear in the same swallow? The wheel jerked and locked. Andrew's shout tore the rain. Vanessa's pearls scattered like hail. The safe glinted the size of a sin. Lily's fingers dug into my sleeve. The tower shook once, hard, like it was sneezing out a century of dust. I had one heartbeat to choose. One sun. One town. One metal box that could take a lot of people with it if it cracked open the wrong way. The river opened its mouth. Open mine. Can you feel your life split into before and after in the space it takes to inhale? I wish I could tell you I chose like a saint, but saints don't have arthritic knees and grandchildren and recipes scribbled on the backs of old envelopes. I chose like a woman who remembers the faces of every person who ever bought a pie from her to celebrate a child's birthday. I shoved the wheel with everything I had left and screamed for Josh to get to the balcony. He ran long-legged, his jacket swallowing rain, Lily right behind him, steady as punctuation. Have you ever sent your heart into the dark wearing your grandson's shoes? The sluice budged. The river took the offer. Pressure shifted with a groan that ran up my arms and into my teeth. I tasted copper and memory. I shouted into the radio again out of stubborn hope. Nothing. So I shouted into the night. Get off the lower floor. My voice carried. Anger makes a wind tunnel. Inside, silhouettes scrambled up the stairs like ants rearranging panic. Vanessa clutched the safe handle with one hand, the rail with the other, pearls biting her throat. Andrew thrashed in the surge below, jacket ballooning like a failed parachute. He caught a beam, the beam moved. Ever watch your child become a stranger to the laws of physics? Josh vaulted the rail onto the balcony. He slid, recovered, braced, reached for Vanessa. She jerked away, eyes fixed on the safe as if money could swim. Leave it, he yelled. It's donations, she screamed back, as if naming it would drown the guilt. The safe yanked her sideways. The balcony coughed up a bolt. The room tilted. Phones filmed. People narrate their own disasters these days, as if telling the story while it happens might make it end differently. Do you narrate too, or do you pray? Lily took a coil of string from her pocket, because of course she had string. Lily always had string, and tied it around the balcony post, then around her waist, then around Josh's belt loop with fingers quick as thought. Hold me, she hissed, and he did, and she went hand over hand along the slick rail like a cat born of verbs, not nouns. She reached Vanessa and wrapped the string around the safe handle and a second rail, made a knot that would have impressed sailors, and then slapped Vanessa's hand. "Choose," she said. Vanessa stared like people do when they discover gravity was not a rumor. The pearls broke. White beads scattered like a rotten constellation. "Do you believe in moments when even the greedy remember they can empty?" Vanessa let go of the safe. It swung, banged, hung ugly and faithful. Josh pulled her up by the elbow, and she clawed his forearm like a drowning cat. I shoved the wheel again. Andrew's beam pivoted and released, flinging him into the churn. He went under. He came up, eyes glassed with shock. "Mom!" he gargled, and the word was a ship returning to a port it had boycotted. The turbine throat was 10 yards away, guzzling everything that didn't hold still. Henry's lessons rose like bread in my chest. Angles, ropes, leverage, the way water loves a path. "Left corner, Eddie," I screamed. "Swim to the left. Now." Have you ever thrown a map with your mouth and prayed someone reads it in time? He saw it, the smooth lip where the current folded around a stone, and he clawed toward it, face white as paper under mud. The river tried to argue. I argued louder by giving it room. Metal moaned. The wheel shuddered. My back bit like a betrayed dog. I thought of every time I'd carried grief upstairs by myself and knew I could carry this too. Then a beam above us cracked with a gunshot sound, and the turret coughed dust older than my wedding vows. The floor jumped an inch. Lily yelled a word you don't say in church. Ever feel a building remember that it is a pile of separate things? Andrew found the eddy. It held him like a doubtful hand. Josh got Vanessa to the upper stairs. People poured up, soaked, shivering, their fancy shoes abandoning the pretense that leather can float. The mayor clung to the rail and sobbed that he'd never approved any new locks. Someone shouted that the safe contained more than cash. Someone else shouted that phones were still recording. Secrets bled through the air like ink in water. You think truth arrives like thunder. It usually comes like a leak you ignored until the ceiling caves. Blue lights splashed the night. Firefighters crashed through the high door with ropes and faces that didn't ask permission. "Who opened it?" the chief demanded, and I raised my hand with the key gleaming in my palm like a confession that forgives itself. He nodded once, crisp and grateful, and tossed a rope to the eddy. Andrew caught it. They hauled, swore, the kind of cussing that's a hymn for men who save people. Andrew slumped onto concrete, coughing river. He rolled onto his back and looked up at me from the belly of a second chance. "Mom," he said, smaller than his tuxedo, bigger than his pride. "I'm." And the word didn't come, but sometimes all the syllables in the world live inside a look. "Do you know the relief of an apology that doesn't need grammar?" Then a sound rose behind us, stranger than sirens, meaner than weather. The hunger of a crowd chewing fresh scandal. The phones had followed, and within minutes, the internet wore our night like a gaudy hat. "Council cover-up," one voice trilled. "Charity safe tossed to the river," another shrieked. In those screens, Vanessa was a villain, Andrew a fool, I a witch or a saint depending on who needed a mother that hour. Fame is just a house with no walls, warm when the wind is kind, freezing when it isn't. Have you ever wanted to throw every phone into the river and listen to the dark breathe? The chief's hand landed on my shoulder. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. Levels downstream, more gates to adjust." Downstream, the floodplain curved toward the trailer park and the little church that kept soup hot all winter. He nodded. I was old enough to need to sit down. I was young enough to outrun my own ache. We moved. Behind us, voices braided into a rope that would try to tie me to a story I wasn't finished writing. Up ahead, the river waited to see if I remembered the last song Henry taught my hands. Do you ever walk into the next hard thing before the first one has finished echoing? We reached the second wheelhouse and found the lock twisted wrong, as if a greedy hand had tried to force it. The key balked, scolded, then relented. The wheel turned smoother here. The gate sang open, the water bowed its head. My chest unlocked inch by inch. I thought of the lemon bars cooling on my counter. I thought of Lily's fierce knots. I thought of Andrew's eyes in the eddy and Vanessa's pearls scattering into a story she couldn't curate. I thought, too, of the life lesson people always want tied on a ribbon at the end of nights like this. Respect your elders, sure. Listen to warnings, yes. But deeper than that, something about the way love can be a dam and a river, both holding and releasing as needed. Do you ever crave a lesson that isn't simple because you know simple breaks under real weather? When the last gate settled and the water agreed to behave, the chief said, "You just saved a lot of people, ma'am." I nodded, because saying thank you would have loosened a cry that belonged to a different room. A paramedic tried to wrap me in a blanket. I let her, because sometimes being brave means letting someone mother you for a minute. My phone buzzed in my pocket like a trapped bee. I didn't look. If the world wanted to name me, it could wait its turn. Then Josh came pelting down the path, hair plastered, eyes bright with a boy's first big courage. "Gran," he said. "They found something in the safe." He glanced at the chief, then back at me. "It's not just money." He swallowed. "It's a ledger, and your name is in it." Do you feel how the night changed shape again, like a hand reaching into a bag and not yet knowing what it will close around? They sat me in the back of the rescue truck because the bench was dry and because my knees had started to argue like old neighbors. Josh hovered, a human question mark. The ledger lay on a towel, wet but legible, ink bruised into lines that still made sentences. The fire chief and a police lieutenant flipped pages with gloved care. Numbers marched like ants. Names bloomed like mold. The mayor's initials here, a contractor there. Donations gone missing, one neat column at a time. And then, "Margaret Cole," the lieutenant read, eyes flicking up to gauge the weather of my face. Have you ever seen your own name in a place it shouldn't be and felt your past reach up to take your wrist? Andrew stumbled to the truck, blanket around his shoulders like a bad idea dressed as comfort. His lips were blue at the edges. Vanessa skulked 2 cars away, hair limp, pearls threadbare, one camera daring her to cry. "Mom," Andrew said, softer now. "If this is about the cannery loan." He didn't finish because the lieutenant kept reading, and the line wasn't a loan. It was a consultancy fee, 5 figures paid over 3 springs, approved by WC Events and Infrastructure LLC, signed by a director whose name you already know. I laughed, the kind of laugh that knocks the wind out of itself. Ever hear a sound come out of your mouth and not recognize it as belonging to any life you've lived? "I never took a fee," I said, voice level from 1,000 pies sliced down the middle. "I gave them a recipe for keeping the river out of basements, and they called it nagging." The chief looked at the ledger as if it might learn some manners. "Could someone have used your name?" he asked. I looked at Andrew. I looked at Vanessa. Accusation is a stick that looks satisfying until you feel its splinters. "Breathe." "Yes," I said. "Someone could have." Do you know the difference between mercy and pretending you don't see? The lieutenant asked me to make a statement in the morning. I said I would if the town still had a morning worth waking into. Outside the truck, a woman from the trailer park hugged a firefighter so hard his helmet tilted. A boy stood barefoot in the mud with a dog under his sweater, both of them shaking with adrenaline that didn't know whether to bark or sob. The river murmured, busy with the work of remembering its banks. People began to look at me the way you look at the person who pulled you from sleep when your house smelled wrong. Half love, half the unnerving knowledge that they could have slept forever if I'd stayed quiet. Does gratitude ever make you want to leave the room until it calms down? Andrew climbed into the truck like a man boarding a small, embarrassing ark. He sat across from me and twisted the blanket fringe. "Mom," he tried again, Vanessa handled. He looked at her and something in his face broke open like mourning. "I let her handle it," he corrected, and the truth in the sentence put a dent in his pride you could plant daisies in. "Because she made me feel like the boy with the paper route who finally got to sit at the big table." I reached across and set my hand on his knee. "You've always had a chair," I said. "You forgot who built the table. Have you ever realized you gave away power that was yours only because you were scared to stand up and scrape your chair back?" Vanessa approached, escorted by a camera that wanted everyone to believe it was neutral while drooling at the corners. "Margaret," she began, choosing her tone like a surgeon chooses a knife. "We should coordinate our messaging. I stared at her the way you stare at a fly that won't understand it has no rights in your kitchen. Hour, I said, and the single syllable did what a sermon sometimes cannot. The camera caught it. The internet would too. I didn't care. Ever feel your last patience walk out of you and lock the screen door behind itself? She flinched, then rallied. It was optics, she snapped, as if the word could be a life raft for the ledger. The consultancy line made the books look more balanced. Balanced, I thought, like a body leaning over a balcony to catch a safe. Josh took a half step forward, protective in a way that made pride ripple under my damp cardigan. Optics, he said. Don't keep the river from eating our neighbors. He looked at me, eyes bright. Gran, say the thing. Do you have a phrase you keep for when it's time to cut the rope? I said it, the way Henry taught me. Water always finds the truth. Silence hung for a beat. The chief nodded. The lieutenant wrote it down like policy. Vanessa rolled her eyes, then caught herself, then couldn't help it, and rolled them again. Fine, she said. You're all saints and I'm the witch. I smiled without showing teeth. Witches know which way the wind blows. You ignored the weather. Sometimes a line arrives that tastes like you've been simmering it for years. Do you save yours, or do they just show up when they're ready? They took the ledger into evidence. They drove me home with the heater on high. Josh stayed, easing me into the warm kitchen where my lemon bars waited like a small, stubborn promise that sweetness still exists after dark. The clock over the stove ticked loud as a heartbeat. The house smelled like sugar, rain, and the wool blanket they tucked around my shoulders. We ate without plates, paper napkins sticking to our fingers, laughing weakly at nothing like survivors who haven't named their edges yet. Then my phone, silent all night by my choice, buzzed once, twice, a dozen times. Friends, enemies, reporters, strangers. I plugged it into the drawer where I keep rubber bands and birthday candles and closed it gently. Ever set aside the chorus to listen for the solo you know is coming? The solo arrived as a knock on the door. Not police, too polite. Not press, too eager. It was soft, measured, ashamed. I opened it to find the mayor, hat in hands. His cheeks sagged by a kind of rain no sky makes. Margaret, he said, voice careful on my name. We need you at City Hall in the morning. I raised an eyebrow. You need me to bake. He shook his head. We need you to tell us where the cracks are. He swallowed. We need you on the emergency committee. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I thought of every time my tongue had been bitten through to keep the peace. I'll come, I said. But I won't come quiet. Do you know the comfort of deciding your next breath will be loud? The mayor nodded like a man lowering himself onto a chair that might hold. He left with his hat still in his hands. Josh put the kettle on because he's a good boy, and we drank tea like we were rewriting something old and complicated one sip at a time. When he fell asleep on the couch, I tucked a blanket over him, and in the stillness I let the night replay. The laughter, the siren, the river, the wheel, the ledger. My bones hummed with tired. My heart hummed with a new, dangerous peace. I closed my eyes and Henry's hand found mine where memory keeps its best secrets. Good work, Maggie, his voice said from the warm cut of sleep. And then another knock came at the door. Faster, frantic, guilty. I opened it to find Vanessa alone on my porch, mascara bruised, holding a shoebox the size of a confession. I need to tell you what I did, she whispered. And who told me to do it? Do you want to hear what fit inside that box? Or should we leave it sealed one more heartbeat? Vanessa stood dripping on my porch like a secret that forgot how to keep itself, the shoebox damp at the edges where the rain had worried it. And for a long breath we both listened to my kettle tick as it cooled, as if time itself were catching its breath before confessing what it had done with us. Ever hear a quiet so loaded it feels like it could explode into names? She pushed the box into my hands and I felt weight, not just cardboard and whatever sins fit inside, but the kind of weight that makes a person stoop when no one's looking. Do you recognize guilt by the way it changes a person's height? Inside, a burner phone sealed in a sandwich bag, photocopies of transfer slips, a key card for the venue's back office, and a spiral notebook with 4 pages torn out so neatly it was like the paper had agreed to forget. Have you ever seen a hole where a memory should be and felt your skin go cold? I did the optics, she said, voice raw as a scraped knee. But I didn't start it. Caleb hired me to clean, not to fix. Caleb Moss, the contractor with a grin like a polished wrench, the one who sold the city a sound system that died if you looked at it wrong. And in that second I remembered how Caleb shook hands with Andrew like he'd already shaken his future. Can you feel the moment a handshake looks more like a handcuff? She told me about the ledger, lines for community expertise fees, they justified by attaching an old photo of me giving a safety talk, and how my name bought them goodwill with donors too busy to check if I'd actually been paid, and how the torn-out pages had a different name over the same line. Andrew Cole. My son, my boy, the one who used to fall asleep with jam on his cheeks and a book on his chest. Do you know how it feels when a syllable you love turns into paperwork? I swear, she said. He thought it was a reimbursement for the Cannery Scholarship Fund. Caleb told him to run it through consultancy because of tax reasons. I said nothing because I wanted the job and the pearls and the way the mayor said my name into microphones. And shame looked good on her in the sad way ruined things can be beautiful for a minute before they collapse. Have you ever pitied a person and still wanted them to face the full weather of what they did? You're coming with me to City Hall, I said, setting the box on the table beside the lemon bars like it was another kind of dessert the town had to eat, bitter and necessary. She nodded, eyes flooded, and I thought of the river, how it tells the truth by insisting on downhill. Are you ready to watch truth do what gravity does to lies? Before dawn licked the kitchen windows pale, my phone grew teeth again. Messages, requests, threats dressed as courtesy, and I slid it back into the drawer with the rubber bands, because there is an order to battle and the first move is feet on the floor, shoes tied, spine straight. Josh woke at the sound of mugs and put himself between me and the day like a good shield. Ever feel your future grow a backbone right in front of you? We left with the shoebox, Vanessa at my side, and I didn't hold her arm or forgive her with my eyes. I just matched her pace through a town that smelled like river and headlights, toward a door that had opened for me only when I brought muffins. Do you know the clack a city hall door makes when it finally decides to let you in as a voice and not a decoration? The council chamber was a throat clearing itself. Reporters like teeth, counselors like taste buds trying to decide what flavor the night had become, the mayor paler than flour, and Andrew standing in the back, hands clasped like prayer had handcuffs. I set the shoebox on the dais as if consecrating it and watched every camera lean in like sunflowers toward heat. Do you see how attention tilts toward consequence? The lieutenant read from the ledger, the chief delivered river levels, the town engineer diagrammed stress on sluices and the happy accident of an old wheel that still obeyed a brass key. Then it was my turn, and I didn't speak like a grandmother or a victim or a saint. I spoke like the dam speaks to the flood. Plain, loud, calibrated. Have you learned the way a voice can be both weather report and remedy? I laid out dates, phone logs, the wrong locks, the dead radio light, the vibration that told my bones a storm is not only sky. I told them I'd been dismissed as passionate and spirited and confused, which is how the lazy pronounce inconvenient. And I did not let my voice shake because I'd already used it on the wheel. Do you save your tremble for metal and leave none for men? Then Vanessa stepped forward as if crossing a state line inside herself and said the name. Caleb, and another name, Aaron, the accountant who moved numbers like furniture in a staged house, and set the burner phone on the table where its cracked screen held a dozen texts that sounded like money whispering to itself. In the whispers, my name, then Andrew's, then consultancy optics done. Have you ever watched a lie introduce its whole family to the room? Andrew broke right there the way dikes break, all at once after months of subtle give. I signed what they told me, he said, voice hoarse. I told myself it was clean because the work was good, because Mom's advice was real, because the venue changed the town. I wanted to be the kind of man a stage points to, not the kind who checks a lock twice. And he looked at me like a boy in a storm who finally admits he should have stayed home. Do you know the relief and terror of hearing truth arrive? Late but intact. The town murmured like a hive that's seen smoke. Someone yelled, "Arrest them all," and someone else yelled, "Not Margaret," as if I were already both mascot and loophole. The lieutenant said the words criminal investigation and forensic audit and conflict of interest, words that sound like thunder wearing a tie. I stood still and let the weather move through me. Can you be a pier when the tide wants to turn the whole shore into driftwood? The mayor, hatless and humbled, announced an emergency committee on infrastructure and asked me to chair it. I said yes with the condition that meetings be streamed, minutes be posted same day, and any optics be lit bright enough to blister. Ever demand sunlight so hard the room squints? Then a woman from the trailer park stood. My house is gone, she said. And I still think Margaret should run the meeting. And the applause that followed wasn't the ballroom kind with silverware chiming against glass. It was the kind people make when they're clapping for themselves because someone finally treated them like grown-ups. Do you recognize the sound of a town waking up into its own hands? We recessed for 10 minutes that felt like a year. Andrew tried to approach me, but the lieutenant tugged him aside for a statement, and the distance between us became a small country I didn't have a passport for yet. Ever love someone across a border they built with a pen? When the gavel rapped us back to order, the fire chief whispered that the river was dropping, the grids were holding, and the worst had passed for now. I exhaled the first breath that didn't taste like rust since the siren. Then a reporter asked if I had anything to say to the people watching at home, and I looked straight into the camera and said, "Tonight is not a miracle, it's maintenance we did late. Go check on your neighbor. Change your smoke alarm battery. And when an old woman says the lock is wrong, listen. Will you though?" The morning after a storm is a museum of choices. Branches where they fell because someone cut corners. Coffee in paper cups because someone who didn't sleep decided to be kind. Puddles reflecting City Hall because truth loves a mirror. Do you walk exhibits like that and label them in your heart? Josh and I drove the high roads, checking on Lily and Marco and Tara, the kids who called me Gran because sugar and listening had made us kin. Lily opened her door with strings still looped around her wrist like a medal she forgot to take off, and she hugged me with the fierce economy of a person who understands time. Have you ever measured love in knots? At the cannery lot, volunteers laid out blankets and bottled water as if setting a table for a giant with bad luck. Vanessa showed up without pearls, hair braided plain, sleeves rolled up, and when a woman snapped, "We don't need you," Vanessa nodded and handed over crates anyway. Do you know what it costs to keep serving when the room doesn't want your face? Andrew called, voice thinner than the signal, asking if he could come help. I told him to lift boxes and keep his mouth closed unless someone asked for words, a rule as old as bread. He arrived with a bruise along his collarbone where the river had argued with his bones, and he took orders from a teenager with a clipboard like penance was a muscle he planned to make strong. Can you love a person and still require that their repentance be measurable? By noon, the emergency committee had its first meeting under a blue tarp, live-streamed with a borrowed phone clipped to a broom, because we had promised sunlight and sunlight shows up even when you don't have a ceiling. We listed every broken thing. Locks, sensors, radios, procurement, the habit of laughing at grandmothers. And we assigned names to fixes the way you assign godparents to babies you mean to keep alive. Are you good at turning outrage into an agenda? Midway through, Caleb swaggered into the lot with a lawyer and the kind of smile that thinks it can outlast weather. And the crowd went quiet the way animals do when a shape enters the clearing that doesn't belong. The lieutenant met them, the lawyer did his dance, and then Lily stepped forward and held up the burner phone until it caught the sun like an accusation polished to a shine. Have you ever watched a girl hand a man his consequences without raising her voice? Caleb smirked until his smirk learned humility, and he tried to talk around numbers like they were puddles he could step over, but puddles reflect and the camera was a lake that day. Charges were not filed yet, but you could feel the click of gears engaging in the town's spine. He left with his lawyer and the wind finally felt like wind and not a mouth breathing down our necks. Do you know the relief of air that expects nothing but breath? When dusk folded itself around the cannery, we built a long table out of sawhorses and plywood and set food on it like a prayer you can chew. Kids laughed, someone played a guitar that should have been retired 10 years ago, and the town ate together with sleeves pushed up and eyes softer than money. I stood with my lemon bars and a plastic fork and thought the word after. Have you practiced living inside that word without letting before? Rot you. Andrew brought me tea, hands steadying at last, and said, I signed because I wanted to matter, and I said, you matter because you carry chairs when people are tired, not because your name is on a banner, and he nodded like a man learning a language he should have grown up speaking. Do you remember the first time you understood the difference between applause and approval? Then my phone, which I'd allowed back onto the table, buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A photo of the torn-out ledger pages. Andrew's name, Caleb's signature, a note scrawled. Find the original safe in the river bend before someone else does. And a pin dropped on a map, red as a wound. Do you feel how night sometimes asks you to lace your boots again? We went with waders and headlamps and a rope tied around my waist because Josh insisted that even heroes can slip, and I let him because I have learned that letting the young protect you is a way of future-proofing their courage. Have you learned to accept safety without surrendering your agency? The bend was a pocket of quiet, water-lipping stone like a dog consoling itself. The safe lay kissed against a snag of roots, heavier than guilt, and when the firefighters winched it up the mud made a sound like secrets leaving their bed. Can you hear a confession even when no one speaks? The lock had failed in the fall, the door bent in just enough for paper to drink river and live. Inside, the torn pages, a thumb drive, a small velvet pouch with a class ring that did not belong to any donor, engraved M. Aaron Miller, the accountant, who'd sent Vanessa late-night texts about balancing narratives, and suddenly the hole around the story had edges. Do you see how names make shadows into shapes? Back at the cannery tent, we spread the wet pages under fans like a laundromat for truth. The thumb drive went into a borrowed laptop, and on the screen bloomed emails about backdated invoices, venue equipment purchased twice on paper, and the childish bravado of men who invent synonyms for theft. Have you ever watched arrogance incriminate itself with punctuation? We called the lieutenant. He called the DA called the state called the auditors, and in less time than it takes a pie to cool, the town that had laughed at me now stood wrapped in the strange blanket of accountability. Do you like the feel of a fabric with threads strong enough to hold? Andrew read the emails with a face that kept trying to be a cliff and failing. He didn't cry because tears would have been a shortcut and he'd taken enough of those. He did what good men do after they've been foolish. He lifted chairs, he made calls, he put his name at the top of the list to testify. Can you forgive yourself only after you finish the chores repentance requires? Vanessa, who had become very small in the best way, sat with Lily and learned to tie knots that save bodies instead of reputations. You don't have to stay, I told her, and she said, I do, and then tied another knot with hands that shook but completed the loop. Do you trust redemption that shows its tremor? Near midnight, a reporter approached and asked if I'd consider running for council in the special election the mayor had just announced for 2 suddenly vacant seats. Caleb's ally resigned, Aaron vanished into a lawyer's office, and the town, hungry for grown-ups, had set out a plate for them. I laughed, not cruelly, but like a woman who remembers the last time a microphone bit her. Do you ever say no to a crown because you prefer a wrench? I'll chair the committee, I said. I'll bake for meetings, I'll teach the names of parts and the sound of a bad lock, I'll show up with my cane and my patience and my loudness when needed. I won't run. Better to be the grandmother of process than the mother of slogans. And the reporter blinked like I'd answered a question she didn't know how to ask. Are you comfortable choosing influence over fame? When the fans finished lifting water out of paper, one last line appeared in pen that resisted the river the way some truths resist fashion. Replace South Radio battery monthly. Ask Margaret for the checklist. My checklist, the one I'd taped to a closet door 15 years ago in the wheelhouse, edges curled but still legible. I smiled at the stubbornness of ink and women. Do you admire anything more than durability that refuses to be pretty first? Weeks softened the edges of the night the way river rounds stones it once tried to swallow. The venue reopened with new locks and old humility. The trailer park got vouchers and plumbers who listened, and City Hall learned to send minutes before coffee cooled. We hung a brass key on a plaque by the high door, not to worship a moment but to make it hard to forget maintenance is a daily prayer. Do you keep your reminders where your future can trip over them? Andrew sold his stake in the events company and bought the empty hardware store on Maple where Henry used to test hinges for their willingness to behave. He put in a workbench and a coffee pot and a bulletin board for repair classes we taught on Saturdays, filters and smoke alarms and the way to read a barometer that tells the truth even when the radio lies. Have you noticed how usefulness is the only occupation that lets regret earn its keep? Vanessa finished her community service before the court asked, not because she's a martyr now but because she finally learned that hands are smarter when full. She and Lily built emergency kits with string, batteries, whistles and stubborn candy, and kids came to class for the sugar and stayed for the knots. Sometimes the best penance is watching other people become strong because you finally stopped blocking the door. Have you ever moved aside and discovered you grew taller by making room? The DA pressed charges. Caleb pled to 3 counts, Aaron to 2. There were hearings and headlines and a documentary pitch I used my best no on because I refused to let a stranger turn my town into content. Grief and anger do not need narration by people who weren't cold that night. Will you protect your story from mouths that only want the flavor? On the night the river reached its quietest opinion of us, we held a meeting at the venue with the doors open to the high street. No chandeliers, no DJ, no pearls. Just chairs, a projector, and a budget laminated to survive spills. We voted, we argued, we laughed the way sober people laugh when they trust the floor under them. I ended with a slide that said, "Water always finds the truth, help it." And the applause felt like work boots drying by a heater. Can you love a clapping that smells like labor? After, Andrew walked me to the old bridge where the moon practiced its handwriting on the water and said, "I want to pay it back. Every cent, with interest, even the parts one didn't touch," and I said, "Good," which is the holiest word a mother can say when a son finally chooses the hard road without asking for a parade. Do you bless with brevity when the deed is the sermon? He asked if I'd come over Sunday to make Henry's stew. Yes, I said, because forgiveness is a pot you keep on low so it's ready when hunger tells the truth. He kissed my forehead and I let myself cry, not about the night but about the long hallway between who he'd been and who he'd become. Have you ever cried for relief so pure it tasted like the first rain after a drought? We turned to go and saw, bolted to the bridge rail by some unknown neighbor's kindness, a small metal box with a hand crank and a sign. Community radio. Check battery monthly. Ask Margaret. I laughed aloud and the laugh didn't hurt. I cranked it, and the little red light blinked steady as a promise that knew it would be kept. Do you prefer a small dependable light to a chandelier that goes out when the weather raises its voice? Back home, I wrote the checklist again on a fresh paper and slid it into a plastic sleeve. Monthly tasks, seasonal tasks, the people to call, the words to say, the pie to bake for the volunteer who stays late. I pinned it to my pantry corkboard and felt the quiet dignity of preparation settle over my shoulders like a shawl. Do you own something as unfashionable and priceless as readiness? Then a letter arrived, stamped with a state seal, inviting me to speak at a conference about resilience and community knowledge. And I set it next to Henry's photo and my brass key, because I needed to ask the dead if the living had just offered me a microphone I could trust. Would you take it? I took it, but I brought my own kind of stage. A folding table, the old wheel handle someone salvaged from the south gate, a bowl of lemon bars, and a stack of checklists printed fresh. The room filled with officials in suits that believed in themselves and organizers in sweaters that believed in each other. And I started not with my humiliation or my heroism but with the list. Because glamour melts under heat but lists hold shape. Do you prefer a recipe to a speech? I told them the night as it was. The laughter like small knives, the siren like a lesson, the wheel as a hinge between loss and afterward, the ledger like mold pretending to be ink, the shoebox like Noah's Ark for receipts, Lily's string like a spine, Vanessa's knots learning a new language, Andrew's humbled hands, the town's tired but stubborn heart. And I reminded them that community is not a warm word, it's a verb with chores attached. Have you been saying the word without doing its dishes? They asked about age, about how it felt to be dismissed, and I said, like standing on a bridge no one believes still held, and they nodded in the way people do when they recognize a place they've fallen from. I told them the life lesson everyone writes on posters. Listen to elders, check the locks. But then I gave them the one you only learn with wet shoes. Pride floods faster than rivers, and the only sandbags that work are made of humility, checklists, and neighbors who know how to tie a knot. Will you sew those bags before the sky darkens? When it ended, officials took lemon bars wrapped in napkins like intentions wrapped in policy, and I went home to find my porch full. Lily with a ribbon for the rope class she taught, the mayor with a stack of printed minutes, Vanessa with a loaf she'd baked herself, lopsided and sincere, Andrew with a bill I didn't need to see because I trust math when it lives in a person's eyes, Josh with a toolbox he'd painted grands. Do you see how gifts start to look like verbs when they're honest? We ate and laughed and made plans for the next drill and the next class and the next time the sky would test our homework. I told a story about Henry dropping a wrench into the river and declaring it tuition, and the kids howled, and the night felt like a living room large enough to include every door that had ever been slammed in my face now held open by elbows. If heaven is a porch with pie and tasks, I have lived there. Would you like a slice? Later, when the house slept and the furnace hummed its kind song, I walked to the pantry and touched the checklist like a prayer wheel. The brass key winked in the lamplight, and Henry's photo kept its gentle secrets. I whispered thank you to the night that had tried to drown me and ended up teaching me how to breathe louder. Some humiliations are invitations disguised as jokes, and if you survive the punchline, you get to write the next scene. Do you accept that authorship? I wrote one more note at the bottom of the list in a neat hand that has measured flour for 60 years. When you feel small, find the wheel. When you feel loud, listen to the river. When you feel alone, bake double and carry a plate. And I pinned it where even my worst day could not pretend to forget. Legacy isn't a statue, it's a recipe card with stains you can recognize blind. Will you leave yours where hands can find it? The town did not become perfect, it became practiced. Radios checked, budgets read, strings tied, doors trusted, microphones less cruel. Sometimes people slipped and we caught them. Sometimes I slipped and they caught me. The weather remains itself and so do we. And when the river rose again months later it found us standing together, not to defy it but to speak its language before it shouted. Will you be fluent when the water comes? On the ridge above the dam, the wind lifted the gray from my hair and laid it down again like a blessing, and I thought of the ballroom laughter that had tried to make me small, and I laughed back. Not unkindly, but like a woman who knows the difference between a stage and a wheel. The night had given me a new spine and the town a new mirror. And if you're listening to this, if you're deciding whether to ignore the old voice that keeps tapping your shoulder, let this be the lesson the river wrote on our door. Humility saves faster than pride, and maintenance is love with a wrench in its hand. Will you pick it up now?